just advanced automatically, but we'll see. We'll see how it works. Oh, it's 5:15. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. Thank you all so much for joining me here. I will be recording this, so I just want all of you that are joining me here now and live to know that this will be recorded. So if you have any questions or anything, it will be recorded. You should feel free to communicate via chat. I will probably get to the chat at the very end of this. The plan for this is to talk about residency interviews. I'm really going to be reviewing a lot of the slides that I presented to you guys during my callbacks presentation. I actually didn't present it to you live in person. It was part of a module. I know after doing this for many years that students may very quickly glance at that stuff or maybe not glance at that stuff at all. And so when it comes time to actually need to know the information, it's a good time to review it. So we're going to talk about residency interview. I'm going to give some general statements. I'm going to try to keep my portion brief. So I'll be talking quickly and going over it quickly, but you have these slides at your avail. And then at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A because I think that's where the meat of this is going to be. If you have any issues hearing at all, please let me know. Try to notify me. I have the chat window up in a different, on a different screen, so hopefully I'll be able to follow along. And then just as those of you who are here or those of you that are filtering in, if you can mute yourself, just so there isn't too much background noise, and then you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. So we'll go ahead and get started about residency interviews. Here we go. So first of all, how do you hear that you are being invited to be interviewed? And it's an email that comes from ERAS system, right? Then you set up an actual date for the interview, either over email or over the phone with that residency program. You usually start hearing about interview opportunities October to November. I know quite a few of you have already heard about some interviews, already scheduled some interviews, and I know quite a few of you haven't heard at all. And so it is still early. I want to make sure that you know that. Setting up your interview, you want to make arrangements for your interviews as early as possible, right? So that means, and sorry, there is timing on the slide, so that's going to make it hard for me. That means as soon as you get an email saying that a residency program is offering you an interview, you should respond back to them, right? Don't wait to get a bunch of emails and then try to schedule things around. Most program directors are going to try to have all of their interviews done by January so that they have time to review the applications and submit their rank lists, which are typically due in January or February. Ideally, you can schedule your interviews for the programs that you're most interested in sometime in the middle of the interview season, but it really doesn't matter. You do not have to worry about interviewing at your top program as your very first interview, right? That doesn't matter, or saving it till the very end. It is nice to have some practice. It's also nice not to save things, your top programs, to the end, because then you won't be burned out or bored of interviewing. But like I said, that really doesn't matter. You want to check and see if you can schedule an interview on a day when you can attend morning rounds or a teaching conference, so you can really get a feel of the didactic sessions that are occurring at that particular residency program. And like I said, I'm going to really briefly go through all of this, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. Your interview days are typically an all-day affair. So they are typically start around 8 a.m. and go all the way to 4 p.m. Sometimes they're about 9 to 3. Things to note about that is it is exhausting. It is a long, exhausting day. So you want to make sure you're wearing comfortable shoes, comfortable clothing, and that you have rested well beforehand. You also want to avoid scheduling too many back-to-back interviews. Make sure that you have time for travel, right? Most of the time you're going to need to get to the location the night before and have plenty of time to get from your hotel or wherever you're staying to the residency site and back again. You don't want to book a return flight prior to 6 or 7 p.m. the night of an interview, just in case it runs long. You don't want to be the person who's saying, oh, I need to head out here early. I need to leave this interview early so I can get to the airport. Wearing comfortable shoes is really important because oftentimes you take a full tour of the facility, which means walking up and down stairs. You usually meet with the program director. You have 1 or 2 interviews with attendings at the program, and you have time with the residents, and then hopefully you get to observe a didactic session as well. I recommend scheduling no more than 2 interviews in any given week. I think 3 interviews in 1 week is not only exhausting, but then logistically it just makes it really tough. Before the interview, you want to make sure that you're reviewing all of your personal materials. That means your own application. You want to read over your personal statement. You want to review your CV. Prepare yourself to discuss anything that is mentioned on there, including any research that you have done. And make sure that you come with a list of questions that you want to have answered while you're there. You can absolutely take notes during the interview. I think it shows well upon you if you do take notes, like you're really interested. And I'll go over my questions, my go-to questions that I encourage students to ask, good things to know about programs. It's also really important that you are introspective. You can distinguish yourself during the interview by showing that you've spent time really knowing who you are and what you want from a program. So one of the quotes from a program director is that everyone has a story, but many of the students we see don't seem as if they know their own particular stories. Many have not really thought through their lives and what they want. So spend time asking yourself, what are your expectations of life? What's it going to be like during residency? What's your visual image of yourself as a doctor? What have you done in life that shows you're hardworking and dedicated? And what besides medicine do you feel passionate about? Right? Really get that feel for who you are and be ready to demonstrate who that is during interviews. Before the interview, you're not only going to review all of your own materials, but you also want to research the program. So don't be that person that shows up and knows nothing about that residency program. Check to see if any other TUCOM graduates have been there. Do research on the latest developments in the specialty that you're interested in. See what kind of specialty tracks they may have at that residency program. Do they have a community service track? Do they have research opportunities? If you can, see what kind of fellowships their graduates go into. A lot of that information is available online, and you want to make sure that you're going in really knowing as much about the program as you can, so you're not asking basic questions, because if you ask a basic question that can be found on any of these sites, it gives the program director the feel that you haven't even taken the time to get to know their program, right? You want to walk in there letting them feel like you really want to go there. I highly encourage all of our students to set up mock interviews. And these could be with friends, these could be with faculty members, these could be with administrators, right? Setting up a mock interview is a wonderful way to really practice your interviewing skills. We can go through some of the questions in that residency program director survey. If any of you have come and talked to me about your future goals and directions, I've probably brought that up. But once you are offered an interview, you essentially are a clean slate, right? And then most of how you perform on the interview is really going to determine whether or not you get into that particular program. For a mock interview, I encourage you to dress and behave as you would during a real interview. If you can, record yourself during the mock interview. So just like an OSCE, you can go back and watch yourself. You can pick up any bad habits. Oh my gosh, I touch my face a lot. How was my handshake? Oh, I paused for way too long. I talk way too quickly and I tend to mumble some of my words. You can really pick up a lot of that. And you want to practice that smile, right? Because smiling is going to portray that confidence and comfortability, like somebody they want in their program. When answering questions, a mock interview is really going to help you to practice the art of answering questions, right? It is absolutely okay to say, let me think about that for a second. Stop, take a nice big deep breath, get oxygen to your brain, right? And actually come up with a logical thought. Because if you just start answering, you may start rambling on and not be able to really give a good representation of yourself. You also want to make sure that you're not just talking to fill up empty space, right? What to wear for an interview, I'll go through this really quickly. An interview is not the time to really explore your individuality with your dress. Now more than ever, it's time to dress conservatively. So you will see just seas of black suits. Everyone wears black suits, right? Men wear ties, wider blue shirts, muted colors for women. East Coast interviews tend to be more formal than those on the West Coast. So that is definitely the time to wear the classic black suit. West Coast interviews in California especially, maybe you can go with a different color, meaning gray, blue, or brown. Still not anything that is too flashy. I've heard that some people say that on the East Coast, women should wear skirt suits. I think that is absolutely ridiculous. And if you wanted to not wear a skirt suit, I fully support you in that. I'd never wore a skirt suit. And you certainly don't want to wear anything bright, shiny, or sheer. You don't want to draw attention to yourself in any type of negative way during your interviews. Your jewelry should be pretty minimal. Your shoes should be conservative. The biggest thing about your shoes, so make sure they're clean, make sure they're closed-toed because you're going to be walking through hospital settings, and make sure they're comfortable because you're going to be walking a ton. So you usually do a whole tour of the hospital. And then you don't want to be wearing anything that could be off-putting to the person who's interviewing you, right? So you don't be wearing any strong smells, nothing particularly shocking. I hear a couple more people have joined us. It doesn't sound like they have themselves on mute. So I'm going to ask you to please mute yourselves just so we limit that background noise a bit. If you have longer hair, keeping it off your face, making sure that your makeup is nice and simple, your facial hair is clean and neat, nails should be short and clean. You could invest in a briefcase. I don't really believe in briefcases, but now certainly not the time to bring something casual like a backpack or a gym bag. What I used is what's pictured up here, a padded leather portfolio, something called a pad folio. I'm sure you guys have all seen that. It's got paper and a pen in it. It's super handy. It looks professional. I tucked a copy of my CV in there. I took notes in all of my interviews in there. I also wrote down the questions that I wanted to ask so I could refer back to there. And then that is also the key place where you want to write down the names and the correct spellings of everyone that interviews you so that you can make sure that you're sending them appropriate thank you cards. The day before your interview, we want to make sure that your clothes are ready to wear. If you're traveling, make sure that you're bringing backup clothes just in case you spill coffee or something on the shirt that you're planning on wearing. Be prepared for all types of weather, right? Interviews happen during the winter season. So it may be raining, it may be snowing, totally dependent on where you're interviewing, but be prepared. Have a nice jacket, right? Once again, not the time to wear your really bright ski jacket for an interview. So make sure that you have a nice jacket for that, a good umbrella. Bring your notepad, copies of your CV, extra pens, breath mints if that's something that you use. Confirm your interview time, review the directions to your interview location. Now is not the time to be late, right? Don't drink alcohol or take any drugs that you don't normally take that might impair your performance or your ability to get up early in time for that interview so that you actually show up as planned. I'm just waiting for it to roll on because it's just doing its own thing. So I don't have any time on this. Don't eat garlic, onions, or anything else that'll be smelly the next day. Hopefully if you do choose to eat those things, you'll have the chance to actually practice your oral hygiene and brush and floss your teeth. And then as best you can, try to go to bed early. Try to get plenty of sleep. You don't want to be yawning during the interview. Typical interview day in the morning, right? You're going to wake up nice and early. You're not going to over caffeinate yourself. You're not going to take any drugs you don't normally take. You want to get there early. You do not want to be the person, right? Most interviews happen with a whole panel of other interviewees. You don't want to be the one that's standing out because you're joining the group late, right? So make sure that you get there early so that you can be there and be ready. In the middle of the day, you typically do eat lunch, right? These are an all-day affair. I recommend first date rules. So ordering something that's easy to eat, not something that's going to be particularly messy, not something that's going to be particularly smelly, something that's relatively easy to eat, that you're not going to be self-conscious about later on. If they do offer you alcohol at lunch, now is not the time to accept it. No coffee or caffeinated tea. If you usually drink caffeine at that time, that's totally fine. Making sure that you're staying really well hydrated so that you're not getting dizzy or tired during the day is important. And you don't want to overeat. You don't want to have to sit back and unbutton the top of your pants. And then at a lot of interviews, they have a post-interview reception. Here it says no alcohol, even if it's offered. If you are an alcohol consumer, it would be fine for yourself to have a glass of alcohol. I wouldn't do more than that for sure. You definitely don't want to let your guard down. And I can give you guys some examples of things that happen during our post-interview receptions. Usually that's a time that's just with the residents and the people who are interviewing. So it seems all casual. However, all of the information about what goes on during those times, it all gets back to the program director. So it'll be said it's off the record, nothing is really off the record during your interview day. So make sure that you are still acting professionally. It's certainly a great time to get to know the program, to get to know the residents in a different setting, but you yourself should still feel like you're being watched, because you are, unfortunately. It sounds like somebody else has joined that has their stuff not muted, so you can mute yourself. We would greatly appreciate that. Hopefully this is gonna move on. I don't know how to advance this myself. I'm gonna try my best. First impression, you most likely are gonna be really nervous. This is why doing a mock interview is really important. So you can practice that smile and that confidence. Don't forget the importance of a first impression, right? Within those first few seconds, that's when most people are making the judgments on you that stick with them. So you wanna be sure that you are there on time. That is crucial. Getting the names, the spellings of everybody who interviews you and the departmental coordinator, right? The main person who has helped you throughout it. Make sure you're maintaining really good eye contact. Make sure you're talking to people with their proper name. Offer your hand for a nice firm handshake. And then there are some subtle things that are really important to do too, right? Just in terms of professionalism. If you're seated in a room and the person who's going to be interviewing you comes into the room, you want to make eye contact, smile, stand up, shake their hand, and wait for them to sit down first, right? Let everyone else sit down first before you sit down. If you're offered coffee or tea, but you're feeling kind of shaky, it's totally fine to say no. It's fine to say no, thank you. And then don't forget to take those nice, big, calming, deep breaths. Okay, this part I'm going to go through quickly because I feel like I've already taken up more time than I wanted to. But these top two, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? If you do not right now have an answer to those that are nice and quick and succinct, then make sure you spend time working on that. Tell me about yourself. It's super straightforward and easy, but it stumps a lot of students. What are your strengths and weaknesses, right? Having that ability to talk about your weaknesses in such a way that you're not overemphasizing them, right? Why did you choose this specialty? That should be pretty easy for you to answer. And then have at least a couple different patient experiences that you can talk about. A challenging patient, a patient that just really connected well with you. Make sure that you have those and that you're able to talk about those stories, once again, nice and succinctly. So you're not rambling on, but it makes sense to the person that you're talking to and you're really connecting with them. Other common interview questions include, why are you interested in this program? This is where that research you do the night before on that particular program, you can bring things up aside from the location, right? Talk about their residency program specifically.
What's the most interesting case that
Oh,
you've ever been involved in?
that's me talking. What's the most interesting case you've ever been involved in? So once again, having those really key cases, key patient stories that you can talk about. How would you redesign the healthcare system? That's a pretty uncommon interview question, but something you may want to think about. And then, and this certainly depends on the specialty you're going into, just depends on the culture of the particular residency program. But sometimes some of your interviewers may want to test you in the face of a medical emergency, right? Kind of put you in a crisis-like situation and see what your grace is like under pressure. So if you're asked something that seems really offbeat, assume that you're being judged on your grace under pressure. Take a deep breath and try your best. Remember that not all interviewers are equally skilled. So they may be asking you a challenging question, or they may just be terrible at asking questions, right? So try to keep the interview focused, try to keep your answers fairly short and succinct, avoid the tendency to over answer, hoping that you're trying to get to what they want, right? Just do your best answering their questions. Be friendly, be positive, be confident, and don't try not to overthink it. There are many times during the interview day when you're going to be asked, do you have any questions? What questions do you have for me? It is okay to say no, except when talking to the program director. That is one of the main times when it's important that you have questions, that you're showing that you're interested in their program. Always make sure that the questions that you have are not questions that could easily be answered just by looking up their program online, right? Because that's going to make it seem like you didn't do anything. If you do have questions about anything about the residency program, make sure you're asking each question to the appropriate interviewer, right? So the program director will get questions about the program funding. Call schedules, that's a good question for the residents. Think about your real priorities and make sure you're expressing them and ask them at appropriate times, right? So asking and asking them in particular ways. So what is wrong with your program may seem much more judgmental than what are some of the challenges that I might face here. And like I said, in the next slide, I'll go over the questions that I recommend that you ask. So questions for you to ask. This is my go-to list. This is what I had written down in my Podfolio. I asked him at almost every single interview I had. What changes do you expect to see in the residency program over the next 3 years? If you're going into a surgical residency or a residency program that's much longer, ask about the changes that they expect to see during that time. I got a number of very interesting and important answers to that question during my interview trail. That question about what are your biggest strengths and weaknesses, flip it around to the program. What do you think the biggest strengths of your program are? In your opinion, what are some of the things that most need to change? What is your program's pass rate for the boards, right? You're going to be taking specialty boards. Those tend to have lower pass rates than like the COMLEXs or the USMLEs. So ask about their pass rates for their specialty board exams. Make sure that's not available online prior to your interview. If you can't see what type of fellowships the residents go into, then ask about that and ask where. What percentage of your program's graduates go into fellowships, right? And once again, you need to make sure that all of this is not already available online. Time spent with the residents, as I already mentioned, the time you spend with the residents is said to be off record. It's typically lunch, the hospital tour, and the post-interview reception. Sometimes it'll be a pre-interview reception. You're encouraged to be really candid. They say it's off record. Ask any questions you have. But like I said, I can guarantee you that all the information that happens during this time is passed along to that program director. Good questions to ask the residents. What's a typical night on call like? How many patients does one intern typically carry? What are the chief residents like? Do you know who the chief residents are for next year, right? Because they're going to be some of your biggest allies. I'm going to skip these. You know what? I feel like I'm going to end it. How about, well, I'll jump to this one. After you interview. So you definitely want to write thank you letters. And this is kind of old school thank you letters. You could send emails, but most people expect the actual handwritten letters to the program director, all the people who interviewed you, any residents or interns that were particularly helpful, the coordinator. You should call the program director when it gets closer to time to submit your rank list. So around January, let them know. Well, you don't need to let them know that they're your number one choice, but you can certainly let them know that you're really interested in the program and you're planning on ranking them highly. You can ask if there's anything that can make you a better candidate. If a program says that you're their number one choice, that doesn't mean, right, nothing is set in stone until you actually sign that contract. So you should still make sure that you have backup options. We have had, unfortunately, students in past years who have been burned by that. So nothing is official until match day. That is an unfortunate game that gets played. And then thank you letters. Why should you write thank you letters? It gives you another chance to sell yourself to the program, helps the interviews to remember you. If you can be specific about something that you talked about during your interview, right? So it really jogs their memory, that's ideal. You want to keep it brief so they actually have time to read the full letter. You want to make sure you're spelling their names correctly. You can certainly bring up details of the program that interests you and be enthusiastic. You thoroughly enjoyed your time there. You're thanking them so much for taking the time to interview you. Ideally, you want to send it out within a couple of weeks, so it's nice and fresh. And then this is the last slide that I added on to this, and that is, what if I haven't been offered an interview yet? This is probably the question that I get asked the most frequently around this time of year. And like I said, it's still early. It is okay if you haven't been offered an interview yet. It is absolutely okay for you to start reaching out to program directors. Let them know you're really interested in their program. You haven't heard about an interview yet. You're wondering if there's anything else that you could provide that they might be looking for, or anything along those lines. All right, with all of that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my desktop and I'm going to open it up to questions from you guys. So we are now at 5:40, so we have about another 35 minutes just for questions. What questions do you guys have? And you guys can either unmute yourselves and ask questions, or you can type in questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions? No questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you're at a program doing a audition rotation and you haven't heard anything, say like next month, regarding interviews, would it be appropriate at that point to approach the PD maybe halfway through?
Yes, absolutely. I would actually recommend that during all of your audition rotations and sub-internships that you always try to schedule a meeting with the program director at 2 weeks, right, halfway through, and then again at the very end of the rotation. Certainly if it's during interview season, which is now, and you're doing an audition rotation or a sub-internship and they haven't offered you an interview yet, then it is absolutely appropriate to reach out to the program director and let them know, I'm really interested in your program. I applied to your program. I haven't yet heard about an interview. I am here now doing an audition rotation. I was wondering if there's anything I could do to help increase my chances of being offered an interview. Sometimes they just don't quite realize that you're there at the time when they're scheduling interviews. That now is not the time to be afraid to talk to program directors and to be really honest with them about your interest in their program and how much you want to interview there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. I see a question in chat that says, can you go over your recommended number of interviews to schedule over the interview season? And that's a really good question and also a really difficult question, because technically, in order to match into a program, you only need to have had one interview, right? So those students that really stress out and start freaking out because they feel like their interview number is way too low, you really just need to interview at one program and then rank that program, right, on your list, and then they rank you, and then you can get in. So there isn't technically a minimum number. I believe that Dr. Hartwig has done some statistical analyses about how many interviews a student should have that increases their likelihood of matching, right, of not having to scramble. But I will leave that number up to him. My recommendation to students is not to schedule too many interviews because the interviews are exhausting. And so I feel like I maxed out probably around 10 interviews, really around my 7th interview. I was feeling kind of numb and like, I've already said all this information, right, in all my subsequent interviews. So certainly if you are scheduling a ton of interviews, a ton meaning into the double digits, you want to space them out because you want to make sure that you have time to really rejuvenate so that at each interview you're being fresh and being at your best. It looks like the answer in chat is that Dr. Hartwig says that 10 interviews gives you a good buffer for matching. And that is certainly something that I found. Once you have up to 10 interviews, that's certainly the time when you can start being picky and choose to start canceling some interviews of programs that you would rather not go to. What other questions do you guys have?
So I had a question about if we're writing to program directors toward the end of October, November, and we've either got like one interview offer in hand or none or only a few or not enough, and we want to ask the programs about, hey, would you like to interview me? How do we kind of go about doing that without saying, hey, would you like to interview me?
I actually think it's okay to be that upfront and honest, right? Everybody knows what season it is. Everybody knows what you're interested in. It is always helpful to get something like a new letter of recommendation or a new board score or something that's added into your application. So then you can reach out individually to all of the program directors and say, I just wanted to let you know I applied to your program a while ago. I have this new addition to my application packet. I'm really interested in your residency program. Is there anything that I can do to help increase my chances of getting an interview there, or something along those lines? Really any kind of tickler that you can send them that has them pull your application right from the stack, from like the middle or bottom of the stack back up to the top, is going to be helpful. That little reminder that you're there and you're waiting. And like I said, now is not the time to be that like quiet, shy, I don't want to bother them, they're really busy, because that, unfortunately, this is kind of how the game is played. And so you want to let those residency program directors know that you're out there and that you're really interested in them. Did that answer your question, Greg?
Yeah.
So would you reach out to the program director or the coordinator, or both?
I would reach out to the program director specifically. Yeah.
Okay.
You can always, if you are at a residency program, right? So if you're doing an audition rotation and you're communicating with the coordinator a bunch, and so you have a better relationship with them, you could talk to them. But the person who's going to make the decision about whether or not you get interviewed is the program director. So I would reach out to the program director.
Okay.
I see a question in chat that says, could you talk a little bit more about reaching out to programs that we are very interested in but haven't received an interview yet? Do we just cold call, email the PDs or residency coordinators? So I think this is tied into exactly what we're talking about. And yes, you just cold call them or blank email them. Yeah. So hopefully that answered that. And the program directors specifically. Sure. What else? Should we call now or in a few weeks? Like I said, now it's super early on now. I feel like now is the time when, you know, remember when you guys were in your second year and it seemed like everybody else in your class was putting in like 8 to 10 hours of studying for the boards and you could barely fit in a half hour a couple times a week and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so far behind. I feel like that's how this season feels as well, where people feel like everybody else in my class has, you know, 10 to 15 interviews and I haven't heard from any program. It is still super early. So I'd say that now is pretty early. Now is the time to kind of sit back, make sure you have all your application materials together. If you have some free time, you know, try to do a mock interview, make sure you have answers to those questions. And then probably halfway through October would be a good time to start asking, or maybe even towards the end of October, it'd be a good time to start reaching out to those program directors. If we get an interview to a place not as high on our list, should we schedule the interview sooner or leave that time open for our potentially more desired programs? That's a really good question and a really difficult one. What I do know from personal experience and from experience in working with students over the last 10 years is the best laid plans just go to waste, right? So you could say, I want to save, you know, the month of November or the second half of November for my top interview, to interview at my top residency programs. And that's just not how it's going to work out. Your top residency program is going to get back to you and they're only going to have one date available and you're going to take that date and kind of reschedule anything around it. So it doesn't really matter when you schedule those ones that you're not as interested in. You could schedule them sooner. You could try to schedule them in January and then see, oh, well, now I actually have 10 scheduled. I feel really comfortable with these. Maybe I'll start canceling some of those ones that I'm less interested in. Question about when should we start panicking? And the answer is never. You should never panic. You got this. You can totally handle it. Like I said, you only have to interview at one place in order to match. That residency program director survey that I talked about, I can send the link out again to you guys, or you can just do a Google search of residency program director survey 2018 because the new one came out this year. You can look on there and they actually tell you per specialty what time, like what months they tend to schedule most of their interviews. So if you are into December and you still haven't heard from any programs or you've only heard from a couple of programs, that's definitely the time to start being more aggressive, reaching out and contacting program directors. So hopefully that helps. Can you touch on bringing up some more delicate political interests that we have which may affect how we're perceived in a residency? For example, access to abortion care training or end-of-life care during the interview or when expressing your interests. I'm laughing. I was not laughing at that at all. I was laughing at the panicking comment that was right below that. So certainly during the interview is not a time to bring up your those topics that you should avoid in polite dinner conversation, right? So politics, religion, those type of things. That's an interview is just not the most appropriate time to talk about that. But if you are interested in a program's ability to train their residents on providing abortion or providing end-of-life care, and you can't find that information anywhere else online, it's absolutely appropriate to ask about it. And if you feel uncomfortable about those topics and about bringing them up, then ask about it with the residents, right? So ask the residents, is this opportunity available? If the residents aren't able to answer it, then bring it up with the program director. If it's something that's important to you, then it should be absolutely fine to ask about it. Some programs ask us to invite our partners to dinner. Do you have any advice for their partners? No, it's super awkward just to smile and be friendly. No, it's a nice opportunity for the partners too, to see the residency program, to see what the culture is like among the residents. Same thing, you know, don't overdrink, don't use substances you don't typically use. Make sure that they are in well control of their thoughts and their actions. Yeah, be super supportive of them, because like I said, that tends to be a little bit awkward for the partners themselves. Yeah. Did I answer those questions? Did I answer the question well enough about bringing up topics like learning how to do abortions or end-of-life care? And did I answer the partner's question? I'm going to wait for you guys to respond in chat. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I think, Dr.
Yeah.
Hendricks,
Go ahead.
I think one thing that might also be worth bringing up at this point in time in those like difficult things to talk about with residency program directors is LGBT issues, since I don't know if anybody else is going to ask about that. So could you speak to that as well, please?
Yeah, totally. Can you tell me what you mean? Like if you yourself are
like
LGBT
if
or
you yourself are an LGBT identifying person or anything along those lines, and you don't necessarily want to out yourself to your program or any of those sorts of issues, or issues like trans care, if trans care is important to you, or
totally. So I would approach those. I would approach that the exact same way. If it is an issue that is important to you, then you should absolutely bring it up. So if it's important to you that you get training in trans care, if it's important to you that you know that your residency program, which should be important to all of us, that you know that your residency program is going to be supportive of you, regardless of any of your any components of who you are, then absolutely bring it up. Bring it up to the program director. That should not be something that is negotiable, right? You should make sure that you are certainly in a safe, supportive environment. And if you get the feeling that a program is not safe and supportive, then that is not a program that you should rank. So I don't know if I fully answered that, but yeah, I feel really strongly that your learning environment has to be a positive, healthy learning environment for you. So that, yeah, that becomes a pretty serious topic that hopefully shouldn't be off bounds. And certainly your time with the program director, it tends to be one-on-one with the program director. And so that's the time to bring up those key sensitive issues if you're feeling that way about them. I see another question on if I'm on a sub-I during a major interview month like November, should I assume that I'll not be able to take any days off, or should I ask the coordinator? All residency programs are well aware of when interview season is, so they absolutely expect that you're going to be asked to go on interviews or need to go away on interviews. This is when it's key that if you're applying to programs that are at sites that are distant from where you are, so you're going to need to travel, so you're going to have to take not just 1 day off but 2 days off, that you're making sure that you're scheduling those interviews right on Mondays or Fridays so that you're not cutting into the work week. And then you want to notify the program coordinator, right? If you're doing a sub-I, you want to notify the coordinator, the person that you're working with, as soon as you can. So if it's as soon as the rotation starts, let them know I have interviews on these days. I would love to be able to make up the time. What are some other days that I can come in, or can I take an extra call schedule or an extra call shift, or can I do an extra project? How can I make up this time that I'm going to be missing anything by going on interviews. But absolutely, the programs expect that you'll be going on interviews at other places during those the interview season months, which are really November, December. If we know before them, should we let them know now? Yes. So if you know now that you have something scheduled during a time when you're doing a sub-I, yes, reach out to the coordinator who helped you set up that sub-I and let them know. I have interviews scheduled during this time. I'm letting you know now so that I can try to work my schedule around it and make sure that I do those extra days to make up that time. Somebody else says that this is super good information. Somebody else says that they notified the coordinator ahead of time and their sub-I was switched to an elective, which is really interesting and not something that a program actually should do or should be able to do. Having it switched to an elective is, a sub-I is really the strongest thing that you could do at a program because you get treated like an intern. If it's an elective in the same subject, so if you were going to do a sub-I in internal medicine and now you're just doing an elective in internal medicine, you're still interacting with the residents. You should still schedule time halfway through to talk to the program director and at the end to talk to the program director. And then I would even push to ask if you can take call and do things like that so that you're still kind of working as a sub-I, even if they're trying to punish you by no longer calling it a sub-I. But it should at least still give you that opportunity to have the program get to know you as a person beyond just your paper application. What other questions do you guys have?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. When you say we should talk to the program director halfway through, is that like, I love your program, how do you think I'm doing, that kind of thing? What's happening halfway through?
Yeah, it depends partly on what your interaction with the program director has been. So if you have, if your program director has been on, meaning they have been taking patients and you've been working under them during that time, yes, absolutely. That's a great time for midway feedback. If you haven't really seen the program director and this is your first time meeting with them or you've just seen them in didactic sessions, then I wouldn't necessarily see this as an opportunity for feedback, for you to get feedback, but just to tell them, I just wanted to meet you and let you know that I'm here. I really love your program. This is what I love about it, right? So give, a few key points, highlights, bullet points of things that you really like about their program. If you haven't heard about an interview, then you can say, I haven't been offered an interview yet. I'm wondering if there's anything that I can do to increase my chances of being offered an interview while I'm here, or something along those lines. But I would keep it pretty short and sweet. Just let them get to know you, see your face, things like that. Does that answer your question? Is that Erin?
Yes, thanks.
Awesome. What other questions do you guys have? Where do we send these thank you cards? So the thank you cards, you can send them to the, if you go onto the residency program website, there will be an address there, or to the hospital, the main hospital site. So it would be, on the front of the envelope, you would write the program director's name or whoever interviewed their name or the program coordinator's name. Then you'd say, the residency program, so family medicine residency program, and then you'd say the hospital's name and then the address of the hospital, and then mail it in that way. Or you can email them. Does that answer your question? And where do we send these thank you cards? Awesome. What else? Is it appropriate to ask programs what they think they do better, not as good as other programs in the same area? I think it's hard. It depends on how you phrase it. Because that could put somebody on the defensive so that they feel like they can't be honest. Yeah, I think it totally depends on, I don't know. It totally depends on how you phrase it. So if you were to say, there are these 2 other residency programs in the same area, what do you think is the difference? Or what do you think the key differences are? Or in your opinion, what do you think are the key differences between your residency program and these other residency programs that are in this area? I think you could phrase it some way like that. So it comes across like you're just asking them their opinion, but you're not asking them to compare and contrast because you think maybe one of the other programs might be better. What other questions do you guys have? You guys know that document that I was talking about? I'm gonna turn my head for a second to see if I can pull it up. So I'm typing in program director survey. I'm also giving you guys time to type in more questions if you have any more. All right, perfect. And let me see if I can share my screen with you guys. You want to look at this one. Share. Oh, not my email, not my email, not that one. Don't look at that. Stop share. Fail, fail. I want to look at this one. Let's see if we can do that. Is that working? That's not working either. Come here. Can you guys see that? Is that working? Are you guys looking at my email? Now I can no longer see your chats. Sorry. YouTube. Oh, now you're looking at YouTube? Do you guys see the NRMP thing now? Or are you looking at YouTube now? You saw it earlier, but not anymore. Okay, I'm gonna try stop share again. We'll try share one more time. And I want you to see main screen, screen 2. I want you to see this. Share. Is that working?
It's working.
It's working. I love it. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, and I was able to get a chat. Okay, so I just Googled a program director survey, and this is the 2018 one. And so the key things that I want you guys to look at, so they have them for all of the specialties, right? So that's always a good thing to know. Like I said, if any of you have talked to me before, I have pulled this up in front of you. This very first question is looking at all the specialties put together, and it asks the program directors what factors they think are the most important in terms of when they're selecting an applicant to interview, right? And so you can look through these. Not surprisingly, we see board scores, letters of recommendation in the specialty, MSPEs, personal statements, grades and required clerkships, right? All of that stuff shouldn't be too surprising for you. As we go down, this next one, this question is the percentage of programs citing each factor and their importance in ranking the applicants, right? So now they've interviewed the applicants, and so who do they choose to rank? And if we look here, interactions with faculty during the interview, interpersonal skills, interactions with house staff during the interview, feedback from current residents, those top 4 that are ranked as the most important, those all happen during your interview. So when I say that your interview, you're essentially a blank slate, right? Once you interview, making sure that you interview as strongly and professionally as well as you can, that's gonna help give you the best advantage to actually be ranked into a program. So that's where I really emphasize how important it is that you make sure that you are doing those mock interviews, that you are feeling comfortable and confident, or at least able to fake your confidence in those interview seasons. I'm gonna scroll down here and just show you guys a little bit more. Let's see if I can find it. So once again, this is all specialties, right? But they have this for each individual specialty as well. This little box here, percentage of program interviews extended during each time period. You can see that most of the interviews are extended during October, right? So 47%, but there's still a good percentage that are extended, meaning they're just being offered for the first time in November and December And then even a small percentage in January or later. So like, when should I start freaking out? So really not until significantly later than now. And then when are most interviews conducted? We can see the vast majority of them happen in the November, December range, right? With a good quarter of them happening in January. Okay, so this is a super helpful document. I recommend you guys all look at it and help it to guide you. Question in chat, have you heard of any gotcha questions from pastoral students that were asked during interviews? You mean like the really surprising questions, or can you define gotcha question? Mohammed, I'm guessing you're chatting about it. Something unexpected. I have heard of things like being handed a puzzle and then being told, solve this puzzle while we talk, while I ask you questions, right? Just to kind of see, and who knows if that's a manual dexterity question. Some people think the puzzles are unsolvable, and so it's really seeing how the applicant handles that, you know, who else they talk to. I have heard students asked, you know, how would you fix the healthcare system? What do you think of Obamacare, you know, when that was all going on? So it's kind of some politically charged questions. Those questions I recommend trying to be as graceful as possible with your answer. So even if you have particularly strong feelings about it, trying to keep it as neutral as possible during the interview. So nothing that would, I would assume that if somebody's asking a question like that, they're looking to see if you lean one way or the other. And so trying not to give them that answer, but to trying to be as neutral, and all sides need to be investigated. And it's important that, you know, everybody reaches across the aisle to be able to work together on solutions to best serve everybody, the entire population or all populations. Answers like that are things that are helpful. For the most part, interviews tend to be relatively straightforward. For the most part, the interviews aren't trying to trick you. They are trying to get to know you. So by and large, I think what I hear most from students is that they're surprised that their interviews were so easy. You know, they didn't ask me any crazy challenging questions. And like I said, the common easy questions are the ones that tend to stump students. Tell me about yourself. What are some of your biggest strengths? What are your biggest weaknesses, right? Those things that you should be expecting. If you don't take time now to really stop and think about it, they can be challenging. Is there a place to read about health politics? Good question. I think that depends on what you think is reputable sources. I think it's helpful to know what is going on in the world of politics in terms of healthcare and the healthcare system. I think it's also okay to be pretty general and pretty generic with that. I look at NPR all the time for a lot of my news resources, but that probably tells you a little bit about my political leanings as well. So I think you can read up about it and JAMA, right? Sometimes some of the major medical journals will talk about some of the political stances going on with health. And like I said, as long as your answer is fairly neutral and talking about the importance of hearing from all sides and reaching across aisles and making sure you're serving all populations, I think those are things that nobody could disagree with. Have you heard of any group interviews? Yes, absolutely. A lot of times, actually, a lot of residency programs do use group interviews for some of it, meaning that, you know, almost always you will come to the hospital with a group of other people who are interviewing, right? So you see the sea of black suits, because just all black suits everywhere. And then at some residency programs, they will separate you out to do individual interviews with certain faculty members and then the program director. Sometimes they will have you do group interviews with faculty members and then individual interviews with the program director, or vice versa. So yes, group interviews do absolutely happen, or at least a portion of your interview may be a group interview. Is it okay if you're not able to come up with specific examples for a question? Can you be more specific about that question? And I know I find that funny, but I'm really serious. Like, what do you mean about you can't come up with specific? Like if they ask you, tell me about a patient that you took care of that was challenging and you can't think of a specific example, it's okay. And once again, it's like your grace under pressure, right? So it's okay to say, oh, that's a great question. Give me a second to think about that. Take a deep breath and really think about it. And you could say, you know, no specific examples are coming to mind, but I certainly know how I feel in these types of situations, or something like that. Like, as long as you're able to give them something and show them that you're trying to answer is key. But that's where doing those mock interviews are really, really helpful. Don't go to InfoWars, I like it. Okay, awesome. Hopefully I answered your question. In chat it says yes, something along that line. What other questions do you guys have?
Hello?
Hello.
Let's see.
Do you have a question? I could hear you before, but now I can't if you're talking. Is somebody talking really quietly? I'm going to answer whatever's in chat, because if you're talking out loud, I can't really hear you. I can't quite pick it up. Any examples of things that were said during interviews that were really bad, like a student answer? Like, oh yeah, go ahead. Do you have a question?
呢種藥係長期會冇記性同埋性嘅啦。
I can't understand that question.
係啊，所以你呢種，如果你係呢種病係真係你冇幾耐活得到嘅咧，啲人通常已經係呢種藥。
But if he has any questions that he wants to ask me, he should either unmute himself or speak in chat or type in chat. So any examples of things that were said during interviews that were really bad, like a student answered and it was something that was really bad. It's hard to tell, right? I think students, as you guys know, tend to be really hard on themselves. And so if they don't match into the residency program of their choice, they will come up with all kinds of reasons why they didn't match. So I don't know. I certainly, yeah, as you guys know, right, taking the COMEX level 2 PE, there's always those things that happen afterwards that you're like, oh my gosh, I did this and it was so bad. And then it turns out that it wasn't that bad because it didn't prevent you from passing the exam. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't worry too much about this is something I absolutely should not say. And if something slips out of your mouth and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to say that, right? Be honest and forthright. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to say that, or I think I worded that incorrectly. That wasn't exactly what I wanted to say. You know, I'm worried about the impression that may have given. Really what I was trying to say was this. So just hold yourself accountable, be honest, show them that you're a professional. Don't worry about certain phrases or certain things that shouldn't be said. Would it be a bad answer for our weakness to be our board scores? That is an excellent question coming in at 3 minutes before it's time to wrap up. Yes, I wouldn't, if they ask you what your strengths and weaknesses are, I would not say my weakness is standardized tests or board exams. You can say, you know, if you're given the opportunity, if somebody asks you things that you've struggled with, or do you need to explain anything in your application and you do have failing board scores or poor board scores, you could absolutely say that you've struggled with something in the past. The reason that I recommend not saying that your weakness is board scores is because residency programs are one of their outcome measures is your ability to pass their specialty boards. And so they want to make sure that they're going to be accepting people who can pass their specialty boards. So it's absolutely okay to say that, you know, you've struggled with standardized testing in the past, but then I would always add in a caveat about, you know, but I have incorporated this specific type of studying, you know, like spaced repetition or using more practice questions. And that has really helped to strengthen that, or it's something I continue to work on. And that's true for any weakness, anytime you name any weakness, right? So one of my weaknesses is that I take on too much. I overfill, you know, my responsibilities. And then sometimes it can be difficult to try to juggle everything. And then some things, the way that I'm working on that weakness, right, it helps me to be really productive, helps me to make sure that all of my time is spent being as productive as possible. And then some of the things that I'm working on is delegating responsibilities or saying no, or only accepting something if I'm able to turn something else down. So really giving that explanation of, I recognize that this is one of my weaknesses, but I'm an adult and I'm a professional, and these are things that I'm working on to improve that weakness, or turn that weakness into a strength. Does that answer that question? We have 1 last minute. Does anybody have any other burning questions? While we're waiting for that, I would love feedback from you guys. This is the first time I've done this type of setting, this kind of Q&A session with, you know, a little bit of presentation in the beginning. So if this was helpful, I would love to hear that. If you guys have other topics that you'd like me to do this for, other things that I can do, please let me know, because I want to make sure that you're all getting as much help and everything as you can. I can absolutely share the PowerPoint. Yeah, those PowerPoint slides are actually from something from callbacks, but I can make sure that I share it as well. Awesome. Anybody have any last minute burning questions? It's fabulous to see so many of you. When it first started, people had their cameras on and then cameras turned off as more people came on without their cameras. So it's really just me staring at myself, smiling in the computer, and then looking at all of your names. But it's great to see all of your names. Oh, hi! Yeah, like I said, if there's anything else that I can provide for you, if you guys have any other feedback, I would greatly appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up right at 6:15. If you have any questions that go beyond this, or you have personal questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to schedule time to chat with you or to do an email exchange with you or anything like that. All right, thanks so much. I'm going to end the meeting.